So hello everyone, welcome to Peter and Deborah doing a podcast. Hello Twinny. I must ask you how you're recovering from your party last week. Well, your endless parties it seems at the moment.
I had 2 parties last week and both of them were beyond my expectations, I would say. So at the risk of offending anyone who wasn't invited to either or both the parties, we had a reception in Parliament, which was really for organisations big and small that the NSPCC has worked with over the last 10 or so years. And it was just a lovely sort of celebration of being stronger together. And there was such a mutual sort of respect, I think, that individuals and organisations had in the room. It was a lovely occasion. I felt quite proud of the strength of the bonds between some organisations that haven't always got on with one another. In fact, the NSPCC did have a reputation at some points in its history for being one of these kind of hero charity rise to the rescue because everyone else is useless sort of
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
So that was lovely. That was on the Wednesday, and then on the Thursday I threw a party in the kind of best traditions of what leaving parties used to be like in the old days, when everyone was in and around the office and just went out, had a drink and a little bit to eat, and we had a DJ and we had a Wanless family playlist which kind of kicked in from 9 o'clock, and it was lively and fun, and there were no real formal speeches apart from me telling a few stories. So it was a lovely week.
Yeah, I was happy to be there. I was sorry I couldn't stay longer, but I was so impressed with your shoes. As you know, I'm a bit of a shoe person myself, although I'm not able to wear most of my shoes now because of my arthritis and my neuropathy. And I did manage to take a picture, so I shall probably share it with our listeners so they also can gasp in awe at the beauty of your shoes, Peter. They were wonderful.
You just cut out for a moment there, but I think it was all about the beauty of my shoes, which I agree. They were definitely party shoes, weren't they? Dancing
they were,
shoes.
Absolutely. You talk about how it was a wonderful celebration of collaboration stuff. Can I ask you a question? Because all of our big infrastructure, but like NCVO, Akivo, DSC, IOF, all the rest of it, we used to have a very, I think I would say, quite a scratchy relationship up until the pandemic. And the pandemic kind of forced us to grow up, really, and get over ourselves and work together more collaboratively. And we've managed to maintain that. So there's very, very much more this sense of we're in it together. There's not one organisation is taking over everybody else's and being in charge. A lot of the collaboration, of course, is behind the scenes. You wouldn't necessarily always see it publicly. But it wasn't easy to get to that point. How is it that your children's charities, which, I do recall, didn't always necessarily get on desperately well together. What changed? Was it the pandemic? Was it work done before then?
It probably was a bit the pandemic. I think a lot has to do with personalities and what leaders particularly want and need. So there are 5 of us that work particularly closely together in terms of children at the table. We ran this campaign in the run up to the election that children's voices should be heard. So Lynn from Bernardo's, Mark from the Children's Society, Paul from Action for Children, Anna from National Children's Bureau, and me. I think we have got to a place now where we are kindred spirits who kind of trust and respect one another at quite a deep level, and that does take time to work on. Not without its problems, because there are all sorts of other great children's charities beyond the 5 of us, and the more we sort of do together, the more you risk fracturing the relationships with other, magnificent leaders and people who want the best for children. But that feels like a particularly special relationship, and I think we all feel impatient for change for children, and actually it's an individual and collective failure that children have dropped so far down the pecking order when it comes to issues which people feel are urgently in need of of attention. So we do have quite a self-interest, never mind a collective interest, in getting more people talking and thinking about children more of the time.
Yeah.
So probably that
I mean,
as much as anything
helped. I mean, I've also, it's been my experience, you know, not just my personal experience, but from observing these things as well, is that often, even if the chief executives have a strong working relationship and a real desire for collaboration, sometimes the boards can get a bit in the way. Because, you know, boards also are putting pressure on, you know, no chief executive can ever operate independently. A board has to say, yes, we agree, we want to do things in partnership, or yes, we agree, you know, we must do these things together. And sometimes board members have a slightly different view and they want the organisation to stand on its own and be sort of, you know, a clear leader in the field. And so I think that can sometimes get in the way. And I'm not saying they're coming from a bad place, those trustees. You can understand it, you know, and trustees are responsible for the whole charity and the future of the charity and its brand and its reputation. Very often they do want it to stand out and be noticed, and they're not necessarily as keen on the collaborative stuff if they think it takes away.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And actually that it's been the reverse of that, I would say. Our chairs have been rather determined to hold us to account for working more effectively with one another and not laying ourselves open to the accusation that we're ploughing some sort of a narrow furrow and not
That's fantastic.
working with and through others. So yes, there's been any pressure at all, I think it's been on us to collaborate and identify, you know, distinct areas of expertise for each of the charities that we can support one another on, as well as coming together. Now, I'm sure that quite a few people listening to this would think, well, you know, why does it need to be 5 of you at all? Why can't you all come together and have a single finance department and a single? And so, you know, there are opportunities and limitations to the way in which we're choosing to work with one another at the moment, but the cultures are quite different and our histories are different, our focus is different. You know, the NSPCC is fundamentally a child protection charity. The others would pick out things which they are particularly focused on, but you know, the common thing which we all have is the desire to listen to and promote and understand the voices and perspectives of babies, children and young people. So,
and I must admit, that's always annoyed me. That's that sort of notion that everything is better if you just merge into one gigantic charity that covers the whole country, because it defeats the whole bloody object of the thing. The whole point about charitable endeavour, it's about people coming together, volunteering, donating, caring, and of course charities have different cultures, but it's also this kind of assumption that if we were to say, right, we should have all these supermarkets, there should just be one supermarket that covers the whole country and that should be the end of it. Consumers have a right to choice. We have a right to choose. But somehow when it comes to charities, we have this notion that, like, you know, the beneficiaries or service users or, you know, clients of charities don't deserve choice, or volunteers don't get to have a choice, or donors don't get to have a choice. It's always really annoyed me. I think even if you have two very similar charities, I remember there was an MP, I think it was Simon Hughes. I think he was a Lib Dem MP for Southwark. I think, you know, my memory is, you know, we're getting on, Peter. So I always remember the detail. But I do remember him attending a conference where he spoke up about there'd be too many charities. He said there were 16 homeless charities in Southwark, and that's far too many, and there should just be one. And I kind of, you know, it's kind of assumption that homeless people don't have opinions. They're just poor, desperate people who should be grateful for whatever help is offered by whoever decides to give it to them. And I don't know if you, Peter, have ever worked alongside or encountered, you know, homeless people, whether they're street homeless or whether they're simply like looking permanent accommodation. They are human beings with opinions, and they will go to one particular homeless charity and they won't like it. They won't like the culture. They won't like the staff. They won't like the way they're dealt with. They'll prefer someone else. Why do those people not have a choice? It's such a Victorian patriarchal notion, isn't it? Is that you shall be done unto by the greater, better people, and you shall just be grateful for whatever you receive. And God forbid you should, you know, and also, all of us who work in charities, we know sometimes they can be cross and critical and demanding, and so they should be. Why on earth shouldn't they have the right to be exactly the same as any of the rest of us? walking into a shop or a supermarket. Anyway, there you go. That's my rant
Well,
about too many charities.
we're going to violently disagree on this one because, before I was at the NSPCC, I was chief executive at the Big Lottery Fund, as it was called then, as you know, and we promoted awards for all, small grants to all sorts of issues and charities and passions, and people want to act in support of the things which they care really passionately about personally. So why on earth would we constrain them to say, well, you're not allowed to feel passionately about that particular cause, never mind the fact that your son or daughter has died as a result of this disease or something that has happened to them, or that you really care about what's happening in your area. You're only allowed to support this if you join some other impersonal conglomerate over there, which isn't to say that there aren't huge opportunities and value in really big charities with the muscle and the knowledge and the wherewithal to achieve transformational change on a large scale. There's places for everyone.
Both.
So like you, I think the more the merrier, and we should encourage people to follow their passions. Now, they do need to put their kind of cause front and center, and the impact of what they're trying to achieve front and center, and not themselves front and center. It takes us into a rather topical item, I think, for discussion, and the Charity Commission's recent report on the Captain Sir Tom Moore Foundation. And I'm sure you'll have thoughts about the substance of that and the associated media coverage, because it seems to be being used to batter a lot
charities.
Yes.
As I want to say about the first thing, I think, is that we need not to be too worried about it. I mean, what they've done is it's shameless. It lacks all sorts of ethical, moral behaviour, but it wasn't illegal, is the reality. And I'll talk a bit more about how many of us are actually doing things not dissimilar to that. I wrote about it on my LinkedIn page the other day. But actually, we always get this. So there's a scandal about a charity, and then all sorts of people, all the newspapers go, you can't trust charities. And then people start banging on about them all pay too much, all in it for themselves. And you get a whole load of you get all those people on, social media saying, well, I'm no longer going to donate to charities. Sort of thing. So if you've never bloody donated to a charity in your life, show me the receipts. I don't bloody believe you. So you get all this. But actually, the trends over time shows that there's very, very little correlation between a scandal in one charity and overall levels of giving and volunteering. And part of the reason for that is because people donate to the charity or the cause, actually, because people don't really donate to charities. You're right, Peter, they donate to causes. They continue to donate to the cause that's being run by the charity that they know. So if something happens to Sir Tom, Captain, all these titles, you know what I mean, in the Tom Moore Foundation, if something happens over there, most people don't take that and associate it with their relationship with NSPCC, or their relationship with their local homeless shelter, or their relationship with their local children's charities. And in fact, you can see it in the data. Most of the time, when you see levels of giving and volunteering going down, it doesn't directly correlate with charity scandals. It tends to correlate with the economy. It tends to be much more, when people are feeling broke and they don't have any money and they're depressed, they don't donate and they don't volunteer as much as they do when they're feeling better and more hopeful and more whatever. So, yeah, so I think I say to all my charity colleagues, don't worry too much about it. Just make sure your own house is in order, because the people who volunteer and donate for you will continue to do so regardless of what happened in that charity over there. But it did also make me sort of this message out to other charities to say that lots of charities are sitting there all complacently saying outrageous behaviour, we would never do that. But the Charity Commission changed the rules. I can't remember how many years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years. So it used to be that no trustee could in any way, shape or form benefit financially from a relationship with a charity. That meant that you couldn't use their firm, you couldn't pay them to do work for you, anything like that. They changed the rules to allow that to happen. And so now more and more charities are able to, they have a trustee on the board that's a lawyer, so they employ that firm, or they have a trustee on the board that's an accountant, so they employ that firm, or they have a trustee whose brother-in-law is a painter decorator, and they employ that person to come and paint their room. And all of that is allowed. It's not illegal. However, it's very, very dangerous, because even if you don't have any intent for personal gain, you can be caught out by it, because people can argue that actually you are getting some form of financial benefit. Trustee, if you're employed by that organisation that's getting money out of our charity, that's ultimately going into your pay packet. And that perception is a very fine line. So I always say to people, just don't do it. Don't use relatives or friends of trustees. Well, friends, maybe friends is being a bit too hard, but definitely do not go anywhere near anybody's relatives or related parties when you are getting a paid for business, because even though it's allowed, it's very likely to come bite you extremely hard in the bum if somebody turns around and says somebody's getting some financial gain. So I would say, don't do it. Better to take people do it out of good intent, because they get mates rates, or somebody can do it for a lot less, or they can do it quicker, but it's just too dodgy. That's my opinion on those two things.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I think, as you said, Deborah, the scale and the shamelessness of what went on in the Tom Moore Foundation deserves to be called out for what it is. And actually,
Absolutely.
we all benefit from having a really strong regulator that ferrets around in these things, draws attention to where these sorts of things goes wrong, and tells everyone about it. Because I would hope that would reassure people who are thinking about giving donations or already giving donations, that those of us who aren't being investigated in this sort of way and have been around for some considerable period of time have had to have regard to the rules and procedures and the processes that give us the healthy charitable sector that we've got. Someone could write an article about that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So we're kind of in agreement on that, aren't we?
I think we are. But charities have been in the papers a lot this last week. I don't know if it's open season on us or what. I'll tell you one that I found quite interesting. The Band Aid have released their Christmas single again, a charity that has raised extraordinary sums of money for the developing world down the ages, and but have been criticised for doing this by Ed Sheeran, of all people, and actually Bond, the conglomerate of international charities, for promoting an outmoded view of development. I think. Well, that did trigger me a bit, because I sort of feel that on the back of this single and a effective charity and group of fundraisers up to and including Bob Geldof, they have raised extraordinary sums of money for people in need over many years, and have spent that money over time to excellent effect. So what is it? I feel a little bit about Ed Sheeran, I think, the way that you feel about these people who cancel their direct debits immediately they get the chance to criticize someone. Because, well, I was going to say, what has Ed Sheeran ever done for the developing world? Well, he has done some charitable work in the past, some time ago, but I'd rather he and his friends did something that was at least as good as the charitable works which the Band Aid charity continue to do in Africa, than moan about the lyrics of a song which is a piece of history. Really.
Yeah, I think because this is a really, really interesting one for me, and it links back a bit to some of the old NSPCC ads, actually, and some of the RSPCA ads and things like that, and also the big outcry over the Alzheimer's dementia ad. And it's one of those things that we struggle with in charities, isn't it? Because so I absolutely less Ed Sheeran, but I can appreciate what Bond is saying. Is that the world has developed, we've moved on, and we are always in danger of these white saviors going out to save these poor people who don't have any agency and don't have any ability to do things for themselves. And whilst that was more accepted in the 80s. It definitely isn't accepted now. So I do have some sympathy with them saying, like, that worked then, but the world is different now. However, on the other hand, the challenge we have as charities raising money is that if NSPCC shows an ad of a happy, smiling, supported, loved child, nobody donates to you. If the RSPCA shows a picture of lovely, fluffy kittens all curled up in nice warm blankets, looking, well fed and well after, nobody donates to the RSPCA. If Alzheimer's Society hadn't put out adverts about dementia or Alzheimer's, which showed people really well, really healthy, like, navigating their disease with healthiness, nobody donates to them. And part of the problem is if you don't show people the problem, if you don't use the language, if you don't paint the picture, they don't give you money. So we're always, I think, got this horrible balance between people complaining about, I don't like the language you use, I don't like the way you're categorizing it, I don't like that image you're using, that, that kid hiding in a corner, I found that really distressing, triggering, balancing those people with, we can't help those people, those animals, if we don't get the money in, and the negative messaging is what gets the money in. So that's why I'm kind of like, I get the fact we've all got to move on. On the other hand, we also need to raise money to help people because they are suffering and they do need our support. So that's kind of where I sit in it, which is sort of in the middle, really, Peter.
This is really interesting and surprisingly topical because, funnily enough, though, I just over the weekend have completed my last chief executive's board report for the board meeting, which is going to take place next week. And in preparing for that, I asked them if they could dig out my first board report from July 2013 to see if everything had changed, and nothing had changed. Yeah. And one of the issues which I reference in that July 2013 report was a great kind of argument that the NSPCC trustees were having with the executive about an advert which had a boy called Miles in it, and Miles cries in the advert and he's in his cot.
I remember it.
And there'd been a big fuss about whether it was appropriate for a children's charity to have a child crying, and there's a whole load of stuff about how he didn't really cry in the moment and blah 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 blah. Nevertheless, it was very strongly the view of the trustees, rightly in my view, that we shouldn't be living inside the problem and that we should be moving on from these sorts of adverts. There's another amazing advert, NSPCC advert, which Wanless Jr. loves and is always telling me we should show again, called Cartoon Boy, which you can find on YouTube, which is really harrowing and powerfully illustrating the physical abuse of a child. And we wouldn't run those adverts again. You're absolutely right. We're all about prevention and early intervention, and the messaging is more sophisticated. And I've always felt you've got to be able to show the solution, or at least a glimmer.
Yes,
in fact, although you say these adverts are effective at raising money, there is quite a lot of evidence which we have that if you simply live inside the problem, you find yourself in what Frameworks UK call the swamp. And there's a swamp of child protection messaging which lead a lot of people to say, oh, it's all too difficult, it's all too hopeless, I don't want to think about it. So there are ways of crafting messages that are more effective than simply banging on and on and on about the problem. I suppose what frustrates me about the Bond whining is that it criticizes well-intentioned people who are raising money for projects which I believe to be extremely effective still. And so although the song continues to have words that are living inside the problem, the activities and the benefits which are being delivered are something else, and have kept up to date. And it's issue of all the things to criticize, it seems an odd place to go. I guess that's what made me a bit frustrated.
I wouldn't describe it as whining so much as, like, I do think though that there are organisations, and Bond is an important one of those, where they do need to highlight the issues. I mean, there are ways of highlighting issues, I get that, but there's definitely this sense that we've got to move on with our language and our thinking and our categorization, and particularly because, I mean, and we see it even now, there are quite a lot of folk in our sector, Peter, who have white savior complex, who like stand on behalf of people for whom they've got no lived experience of these things, and they're not necessarily bad-minded, but there's a lot of, we're fixing it for you rather than engaging and listening and helping people to find ways to express their own messages. So I think Bond do have a duty to point out some of these things, whether people could have done it, the dramaticness of that. I mean, there's these things don't always go down well. There was a group of folk working with one of our infrastructure bodies who went very public saying, we're not going to work, we've done this work and now we're going public saying we're not going to work with them anymore. And I can remember looking at them and thinking, oh my God, you do realise you probably destroyed your business, because not one of us is going to trust you. You've just gone out publicly and criticised a previous client, and none of us are now going to think that you can be trusted. If you come to us and discover all our horrors, which you will, because all organisations have horrors within them, we can't trust that you're then not going to suddenly dramatically go public with it. So people do make these kind of like very big, I tend to call them quite performative statements, don't they? That they then can't, that doesn't necessarily move things on or help things to move forward. But yeah, anyway, so
it's but I suppose I do think it's, in the overall scheme of things, it's whining, and another example of the sector choosing to attack itself and beat up other well-intentioned people rather than making common cause on who the real enemies are, which are the root causes of poverty. And well, I had feedback from somebody who I was talking to the other day, Peter, who said they really enjoy listening to the podcast. They like it best when we don't agree. So we've had a result. Good.
We don't see eye to eye on everything.
We agree on shoes, but we don't agree on Geldof.
No.
Sounds reasonable.
Actually, it does sound reasonable. So how are we doing for time, Twinny? I think we've done about half an hour, have we? Not far off.
We could probably here's just a couple of minutes to finish on. What are you? I've just started reading Tim Shipman's latest massive tome on the Boris Johnson government, Liz Truss, and the most recent election. 900 pages of political anecdotes, and the fourth volume of this great sort of contemporary history that he's put together, which I'm don't know if enjoying is the right word. It feels like reliving recent history. But anything you're reading or books that you would recommend to people or for possible Christmas presents? It's too late to get me Tim's book now because I've already bought it for myself.
So this kind of isn't, because I have a very eclectic sort of reading. I'm currently reading a book by a chap called Stephen Strogaz, I think his name is, called Infinite Powers or something like that. Right. And it's basically a book about maths. So it's a book about logarithms, and it's a book about calculus, and it's a book about, like, basically takes you through the maths. And I'm absolutely loving it because, like, I finished this section on logarithms. Don't ask me to explain it to you, Peter, because I couldn't possibly. But the way in which he explained it, I remember doing logs back at school. We used to have a log book. You understood why a log was a log or where it came from. You just had the book and you knew where to go and look in the book to get the number that you needed in order to do a calculation. I don't know if you remember those. We had they were long, thin, sort of half A5 books with a blue cover and just like full of numbers. And but he has this way of explaining it that's just like, so I was like, so that's why that works then. So it's just because I love maths. I'm not particularly good at it, is the honest truth, but I'm just fascinated by it. I just really like sitting down and doing equations and things like that is like, when I read these books, I've usually got a pen and a piece of paper because I want to have a go at whatever the maths thing is that he's doing myself. I know I'm really weird. I can't help it. I'm joking with my staff at DSC. I was saying that I'm very famous for reading quite intense books, but watching really trashy TV. And that's how I get balance in my life, Peter. I read, my mother calls them, she says to me, Danny, you've got to stop reading all those tomes. It's not good for your brain. But then I compensate by watching Celebrity Jungle and Master Chef and Strictly Come Dancing and all that kind of thing. My team think I'm weird. I think I'm weird too, probably. And you probably agree, Peter.
Wow. Well, no, it's very impressive. I mean, I read trashy books and watch trashy TV, and I'm not sure what my kind of mind enhancing hobbies are, but listening to you there about really getting behind the details of, you know, what works and how things work and why, that's amazing. That's what Kemi Basenock is going to do, apparently, isn't it? She's an engineer. She's interested in how things work. So I wonder if she reads logarithmic book tables.
I don't know. Well, we will see. We will see. Like understanding how a thing works doesn't necessarily mean you always know how to fix it, Peter, in my experience.
That's very true.
And as much more than just how the thing works, it also has moral, social, ethical, and all those dimensions to it, other than just if we just did this, everything would work. Anyway, we've run out of time.
Yeah, on that note, we'll call a halt. Great to see you. Have a good week. See you next time.
And see you next time. Bye, listener. Bye. As Terry Wogan would say.